The whole pick and choose thing, though, is so illustrative of the problem.
It is.
And one of the things that so going back to talking about posting on social media and not always doing so, or not often doing so, one of the things that I mentioned, I said we have two fundamental differences. One is that you protect or feel very strongly about protecting the sanctity of biological life, regardless of any other potential outcome or harm. And the other, that you believe you should have a choice in the matter in the first place. And I actually phrased it, I think, that you or I should have a choice in the matter in the first place. Like, I specifically referenced that this was not a male problem to discuss. And it's fascinating that what was then picked out of those two statements was actually nothing about the two statements, but do you believe we are just biological life? And that's very illustrative of the problem with having those discussions, because someone who is that absolute pro-life doesn't really care about any of the nuances. They care about whether you believe we're more than atoms that can be terminated. Like for them, it's not a matter of the physical body. It's a matter of life being this abstract concept inhabiting a physical body.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like I can tell a lot of you were taking a nap during biology class because you didn't that or you got a bad biology education. You might be responsible for it. Your teacher might be responsible for it. Not sure, but it seems like around the world people are not having the same problem in similar countries. So we know America is special, and I don't mean it in the good way.
I think I know how I want to how I want to transition. One of the things that's been bugging me is the whole white supremacy angle. And we haven't focused on that a lot. I mean, we've kind of talked about it for sure, because there's a racial component to a lot of things. But the embracing of all of so many different things, like the QAnon stuff and all, the subtleties and the overtness. I don't know how I would describe it yet, but I know that same mindset plays into the political theater of overturning Roe. Like, you follow the kind of thought process I have connecting the dots, even though I don't know exactly what I'm.
No, it's definitely there. Like, but I also just thought of something that was interesting to me that feels like it should have gone in the last show.
Okay, what's that?
So, the idea that abortion is murder. That's what you hear from the pro-life side.
Right.
Abortion is murder. But I know that it is not. That they don't actually think that. They they consciously think that, but they subconsciously don't act that way. If a woman were to walk into a room and she said, "I've murdered 5 people and I don't care," like they, and I could, they were varying ages, like I've, all over the place, versus I've had 5 abortions. Who do you feel more comfortable being around? Like, murder is very different than a medical abortion and terminating a pregnancy. And to compare the two is highly problematic.
So why don't we...
Like, I was just thinking, like, if you're in that jail, you make it make it illegal and you put them in the jail cell. I was like, let's say you're in jail, you're in a minimum security. I assume that if you had an abortion, you'd go to a minimum security prison, versus if you have murdered a person that's years old person. I assume that you would probably be in a maximum facility, just depending on how, I don't know.
So what I was going to say is, why don't we start with what would be kind of follow-on thoughts from...
Follow-up,
yeah.
Sure.
And then don't be surprised when I find a way to weave in at least a teaser about the overt white supremacy thinly veiled as a political weapon kind of thing. I don't know that we'll go into it in much detail yet because I feel like I need to get more thoughts around it anyway, and I think that feeds the notes from the PDF.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we'll touch on it. Maybe it'll just be kind of this will be forthcoming type of topic.
Okay. That's a great follow-up. I think it would be a great place to put this.
Yeah.
Since I didn't remember to say it in the other show. But I kind of want to reiterate it.
And I feel like there's so many different things that we kind of want to repeat anyway. We've done it before anyway. And this is the type of topic that deserves it.
Yeah. Okay. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
I posted on Twitter, I said, y'all pro-choice for these reasons, whatnot, and I get trolled. A woman hits me with this comment. She said, what if Jesus was aborted? Man, that's as low as you can go in the pro-life game, right? But I'm a comedian, so I can go lower. So I naturally respond with, what if Osama bin Laden was aborted, right? She was not ready for that one. But she responds the next morning with, what if Osama bin Laden was aborted? You can't just pick and choose whoever you want to make your argument work. I said, well, now you get it. What's it going to be? Are we going to keep vote? She's like, I don't have to answer that question. I'm like, you asked me, what if Jesus was aborted? Play the game. Are we keeping both JC and Osama? What's the deal? She said, I'm pro-life, no abortion. I was like, respect, consistency. But goddamn, 9/11's on you now. She hits me back with, Jesus is Lord, all caps. I was like, damn, so you're going to let the towers fall in the name of God. That's the same philosophy as bin Laden. That's all I'm saying. You're not in good company. Here's where I credit her, because she responded with, I forgive you for this. Yeah, I said, sure, but never forget.
All right, I have some follow-up from the last show. It was an idea that I meant to talk about while talking about abortion. It was just, I had this idea if, as at some point somebody's going to get an abortion, if this hasn't already happened, a woman is going to get an abortion and she's going to be tried and thrown into prison for that. And I think about like that person in the scenario that I have in my head, that person is in a minimum security prison and she might be in there with a woman who wrote bad checks or something like that. And if you're the woman who wrote bad checks, I feel like if I was in a cell with a woman who had an abortion, I'd be able to sleep pretty soundly. But if I was a person who wrote bad checks and I was in a cell with a woman who brutally murdered another person, I don't think I would sleep quite as soundly. And it just sort of makes me think about the idea of calling abortion murder is not accurate.
Well,
but
go ahead.
I was going to say, but I also think about we should start suing people that perform in vitro fertilization because they discard lots of fertilized embryos.
I'm sure that's coming. At least in those states that are have either trigger laws or
in our state. Jeez.
Yeah. Going back to what you were saying, though, something that I also thought about. Most of the people are in the realm of people that I've spoken with, it's been 100%. But I don't like speaking in that absolutist terms to such a large part of a population. But I would certainly be comfortable saying a majority of the people who talk about abortion being murder have also unequivocally stated life begins at conception. And it doesn't any more than the cheese that's gotten moldy in the fridge suddenly is a life form.
Right. Well, I was just going to say, like last show I said, I can tell some of these folks didn't do well in biology because, the cells that, fertilize each, the cell that fertilizes the egg and the egg itself are both alive. They are living cells. So life doesn't start there. And it'd be like, well, no, it's a different DNA. I was like, well, again, your biology is off. The sperm has a different DNA than you, and the egg has a different DNA than you. It's tricky because it's like, it is the same DNA, but it's not all the same. It's like it's half of your DNA. So we're getting into this nuanced place where it's like your argument doesn't hold up well.
And let's take it a step further. So even if we were to say that there was a point for life to absolutely begin, what are the trademarks of a human life? Heartbeat and absorption of oxygen, I would say, would be the primary two things, right? Like, without those, a person who is outside the womb is not going to live. You can make the case that food, water, those are also requirements. They're requirements to sustain life. But in order to be alive, you have to have a heartbeat to circulate blood, and you have to have oxygen feeding the body. Those two things are unequivocal. If you do not have the capacity for those two things, regardless of whether you can develop them over time, you're not a living human being until those exist. Right?
Right.
So at the absolute earliest point, still is not conception. Couldn't be. What are you going to do? Put it in a petri dish? And then you're going to sue if it dies because it's not the correct environment?
Well, apparently, here's the thing.
Sorry,
I just had this thought. I was like, if you're Planned Parenthood, would you try to develop the technology that goes and finds, it's too small to find, but if you could develop the technology to go find that fertilized egg, extract it and put it in a petri dish and freeze it, are we then okay? Because that's what we're doing in other places, and nobody seems to have a problem with that.
I don't know. Are we okay?
I think that.
To me, I guess that would satisfy the sanctity of life, pro-life argument.
I don't think it will. I don't think it will satisfy the pro-life position, those that hold the pro-life position.
I didn't say it would satisfy that position. I said it would satisfy that argument.
Fair enough.
There is a somewhat of a subtle distinction there. Because the argument is life begins at conception. And so if you can say, all right, well, we don't terminate it. Instead, we extract it and freeze it. And it's available to then attempt to be brought to term later.
Somebody can adopt it.
Exactly. Or it can sit in cryo storage for the rest of eternity, and nobody's going to argue because it's, again, the unborn, and they don't really care that much.
Right. It was one of those things where it's like, we know, like, one of the initial comments that I made on social media about this was I quoted Ariana Huffington about how life begins with conception and ends with the school shooting. It's just a representation of, like, we don't actually care about the children. It's the idea of the unborn or whatever. So,
and it's the emotionally charged, argumentative political theater that we've grown accustomed to, for better or worse. And you have the same general talking points often in general media presentations or speeches or portrayals of dramatizations. Like, we seek verbiage and reaction for the purposes of our preferred outcome. In all of these different spheres, if you really cared about children as a whole, you wouldn't be targeting abortion. you wouldn't be targeting further securing schools. You would be talking about programs to actually feed children, to make sure there's not a child that is unable to have a meal or receive health care or have absolutely no familial involvement because they don't even know where their family might be, or at least address the foster care system in some way that makes it consistently positive outcomes for those involved. There are so many different other areas where if you want to make the argument about the well-being of children, you've got to start walking the walk in these other areas, or you're just full of shit.
That's plain and simple. It's like it's not an easy. It's certainly a daunting issue because there's a lot going on there. But the concept is easy. It's not difficult. It's not difficult to grasp what is needed. It is difficult to accomplish it, and we even saw how much people don't care about children. In addition to like how it doesn't matter how many kids die in school, and again, those are like it's a small number of children dying relative to all the children dying. But during the pandemic, we saw the school lunches that some children depend on go away. Like kids are starting to go. Kids were without the meals that they had come to use because of the pandemic. It tells me that feels very anti-pro-life.
And I'm going to take it a step further because you make a good distinction with that statement. The argument is never necessarily for the children. It's always a pro-life argument. Well, how come we haven't seen anything to illustrate pro-life for any other group? How many homeless people end up dying from one cause or another, and you don't see a march for the sanctity of life for that group of people? How many veterans suffer, are not able to reacclimate to life outside of a war zone and commit suicide? Where's the pro-life outrage there? How many people care about the fact that an average person walking around gets shot, killed, as opposed to a mass shooting? By far, the number of people dying by guns is not represented by mass shootings. It's just that we have a disproportionate number of mass shootings to everywhere else in the world. So they get the headlines. But gun violence isn't just mass shootings. It's everyday people who get caught in a crossfire, or domestic disputes, or like you name it. We have plenty of laws that cover this. Why are we still pretending to have a pro-life outrage surrounding abortion and not gun control, mental health?
Like Pastor Barnhart said, the unborn are incredibly easy to advocate for.
It doesn't cost you a penny.
No, it doesn't cost you mind share. It doesn't cost you money. It isn't going to bother you later. Yeah, this is where it is bullshit.
Well, this is where it's political theater. I mean, it's all about exerting power.
Well, I mean, I'm just thinking about even in the minds of the people who think that they are doing the right thing. This is the problem. It's like as soon as the unborn are no longer the unborn, they become the born. You don't care about them. Like nothing you do is reflecting there's such an uproar, or such a large group of people that position themselves as pro-life and referring only to the unborn. And as soon as they're born, we don't hear anything about other conditions like that we've just mentioned that require reform and change. And there's no advocating for the born.
The extent of what I would say could be considered advocating for the born, and to borrow the parlance, would be foster care and adoption. That's it. That's the answer that everybody always has. And that's nothing. That doesn't even begin to address the problem. That's just one component of a possible outcome of having a baby. How is that addressing hunger or poverty or oppression in any way, shape, fashion, or form? How is it aiding those children through actually obtaining a quality education, through having access to health care, through having access to mental health care resources, to be able to go from a point of, for whatever reason, being given up to functional adult at the age of 18, which I have a number of issues with the whole using the age of 18, but that's a whole different debate.
It's a prime age for becoming a soldier.
Yeah, from a pure physical standpoint, I think.
Well, it's like old enough to be like strong and like strong like a man, as far as, because soldiers have been historically men in this country,
and underdeveloped enough mentally to still be malleable.
Exactly, because you're not done. Your prefrontal lobe cortex isn't done developing for another 7 years. So yeah, you said exactly where I was going. You knew exactly where I was going with that. So
yeah. One of the other things out of all of this that has also felt wrong, I guess is a good way to put it. It's difficult to take someone seriously with it's difficult to take the pro-life argument seriously to begin with, but just acknowledging that this argument exists and these people feel as though they believe it, however strongly, as part of making that judgment, you're exhibiting the very behavior that you profess not to want to exhibit. And what I mean by this, and this is where it gets kind of tricky, the entire mindset or idea of being a Christian would be to show love and empathy to someone regardless of their life's choices. And you see this with church outreach into like the criminal justice system, into corrections facilities, right? Like that's a good example of where you see where I'm kind of going with this particular train of thought. The people who are arguing so staunchly against abortion or against access to abortion make it sound as though it's an absolutely unforgivable deed, should never be something that's an option no matter what. And so how can you purport to show love and empathy to someone who makes that choice and not do the same for everybody else? And it's an odd way to put it, but if you were to take this group of people and you were to have someone come up and be completely unrepentant for having an abortion, which they shouldn't be, there's no reason. That's a different thing, but I'm trying to illustrate the scenario. It's someone who had an abortion, had their choice made, completely comfortable and happy with their choice for whatever the reason. That person arguing pro-life would judge and not want that person around, but would turn around and welcome someone who had committed murder but professed to be repentant for it. And that's so backwards that it's mind-boggling. Because in either scenario, none of what you're doing is being a Christian, because it doesn't require repentance. That's not on anybody in the earthly realm that we exist to do. It's between that person and again, going back to Christian teachings, that person and God. You don't get to know whether they're repentant or not, but I guarantee you the vehemently pro-life crowd would very much not welcome that person who chose to have an abortion and does not express remorse versus that murderer who expresses remorse?
I don't know I don't have a response for that.
It's one of those things that, as I was saying it, I also feel like I talked myself around the point more than I should have. But the point is one that I absolutely feel is valid. It's so difficult to express. Because it's one of those things that if you are attempting to control the choices of a group of people, you're already doing it wrong. Like, before you even get to the point of whether this person would be welcomed in or not, imposing your beliefs on anyone is exactly what you're taught not to do as a Christian. You shouldn't be telling someone how to live. You shouldn't be telling someone what they can and can't do. You should be attracting those people to you because of your actions and beliefs, not because of what you say.
Right. If you read the Protestant Bible, the Great Commission was about going and spreading the good news. It was not about making people believe the good news.
Right. And I think that's where I have issues with the pro-life argument in and of itself. Like, even before you get to whether it's even remotely plausible as an argument from a scientific standpoint or anything else, like just backing up to the very beginning of having this as an argument, it's already not what you're supposed to be doing. And I say that, and then I have to provide a caveat, because the counter argument to me would be, well, then why is there law against murder if you shouldn't be telling somebody how to live, right? Same kind of thing. I don't have a good answer for that response. Not because I don't actually have a good answer for it, but because in the scope of talking to someone who has that mindset, they're not able to distinguish between that murder law and that abortion's not murder. Going back to what we talked about, before. Because all of the arguments, all of the actual good arguments about why you would still have laws against murder and not against abortion are predicated on an actual understanding of biology and science. Indeed.
And that position is not based on, the facts. It's based on the feelings. It's based on being played by, it's a political power play. That's what it ends up being. And it's been exploited for various reasons. Initially, it was exploited for a tax exempt status. But now it's being exploited on a racial level. It talked about the hypothesis about it, making sure that, white women keep having white babies. Yeah.
And this is where it gets really difficult for me to separate some of the different conversations. So one of the things that has also been problematic, and going back to this idea of, the replacement theory is what we're really referencing here. What's driving this concept of replacement theory in the first place? It's white supremacy. If you follow this particular train of connecting the dots, it's difficult not to see the control of women out of a desire to see less of a trajectory toward white people being a minority, not being all intertwined as failed white supremacy.
So you mentioned replacement theory last show, and I didn't ask, but I think I know what it is, but I'm not sure if I know it by that name. Could we stop and take a moment to define what that is, or describe what that is?
So, and I know I mentioned last time that I have difficulty calling it the Great Replacement Theory. But what it is, in a nutshell, is an argument that the minority populations, regardless of origin or anything else, just those who generally represent what are thought of as minority populations, will overtake and replace the quote-unquote normal American population. And I don't know if it's actually referenced that way, but what it really means is just that the number of white people in relation to the rest of the population are shrinking. And inherent in this idea of replacement theory is that all of the things that have been established and are great about the United States have originated with the white population, because that's the group that's been in control. And so as the white population is replaced, it's inevitable that society will over time deteriorate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Loss of norms and values and blah, blah, blah.
What a crock of bullshit.
Yes, very much so. Like this is very much a very extremist, adopted by white supremacy groups idea that has found its way into arguments against critical race theory, for example, or general leanings politically by specific individuals and parties. And you can't tell me that if you subscribe to any concept that could be attributed to replacement theory, that you're not a fucking racist. Whether you believe it or not is irrelevant. You don't have to believe you're a racist to be a racist. You don't have to believe you're a white supremacist to be a white supremacist. You could very well think you're not. But if you subscribe to any portion of that view as factual, I got some news for you. You need to wake up and recognize that you're a white supremacist, even if you don't think you are.
I like the first thing I can't, like, I'm having a stupid response to this. I've heard of this before. I've heard of it before.
QAnon stuff.
Right. No, I've had but my stupid response to this in my head is like listing all the things that people of color have kept around, that have not been destroyed, or we still have despite white people being in charge. And like the first thing that came to my mind was like barbecue and jazz music. I'm like, it's amazing. It's so wonderful. Like what did we destroy that? Like, what did we do that? I don't know. I just like. I'm having a discombobulated response, but it's just like, okay, did these people like eat barbecue and eat tacos and not realize, or maybe they just don't eat those kind of things and they only season their food with salt. I don't know. It's like,
well, the problem is that I'm going to kind of.
I'm not trying to trivialize it. I feel like I have, and I'm sorry, but
no, I think it's a good way to also illustrate that a lot of people don't realize the thoughts they're having are rooted in that as a theory.
Yes, yes,
and so it's easy to laugh about how extreme it is, but then it's concerning when you start seeing how this theory brought about other arguments over time. And as you get these arguments presented with some distance to the theory, it's a lot more difficult to connect the dots if you don't try to go back to, the origin of something and trace it through. And so you look at outrage over critical race theory. Where does that outrage actually stem from? Well, it certainly doesn't stem from trying to teach anything about, disproportionate responses or behaviors or environments around race. Because if that were the case, people would be able to articulate it better.
Right. Well, I was going to say the fact that we have to call it critical race theory is problematic in and of itself. Like,
true.
I love it. It's like we're being critical of the fact that that we describe that there are races based on skin color, right? So, I don't know. It's like, okay, did these people like eat barbecue and eat tacos and not realize, or maybe they just don't eat those kind of things and they only season their food with salt. I don't know. It's like,
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, the very fact that we have races based on skin color is in of itself extremely problematic. I mean, realistically, I can't think of anyone that's not a human that I've met, which means we share far more than we differ.
I mean, the ironic thing is that, there's more, African people have more Homo sapien DNA than European people of European descent.
Yeah, isn't it more...
And we're talking about like single percents here.
Right. But genetically, isn't it more Neanderthal?
Yeah, like European have like slightly higher Neanderthal DNA in their genome.
I forgot
Like,
the
by,
pronunciation was supposed to be Neanderthal.
It's like like a couple of percent or something like that. So it's just ironic that like this science doesn't like the cold hard facts, the genetic science doesn't support the idea of there being more than one race.
Well, there will be once intelligent life is discovered from elsewhere. Then there'll be more than one race, theoretically.
So I think I've said on this show, it's been a while, but I think I've said like we should talk about the Fermi paradox, and I'm pretty sure that any life intelligent enough to get to us is avoiding us at the moment. We are not ready.
No, we're not.
And that just goes to show that I feel like the most likely thing is they just haven't gotten here yet. But if they have and then we're not ready yet, then it also shows that they're benevolent. or they say, I can't be bothered getting into that shit.
I think it's more the latter than anything if they're intelligent.
But if they were hostile, then we'd be in chains or we'd be gone or whatever. So
yeah, we would be the equivalent of slave labor.
Yeah, or just annihilated.
Yeah.
So
going back to I think how difficult it is for me to separate a lot of these particular things and how they're intertwined is also because of how they're presented. It's never, they're always presented together in the same groups of people. And that's the problem. If you had just people arguing, say, the pro-life standpoint that weren't also arguing these other pieces, it would be easier for me to try to separate them as just different ideas that found their way into a specific population. But for a suite of ideas to always coalesce within individuals and never be an idea that's present without the others, I have a real hard time separating that out. You follow the thought there?
Try me one more time.
Okay. Think about it this way. Every time I hear this combination of pro-life and the attacks on critical race theory and the lack of willingness to accept other viewpoints and everything else, like all the different things that we've talked about, it's always the same group of people, and all of the ideas always exist within that same group of people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it would be a lot easier for me to think about them as independent ideas that happened to coalesce into a subgroup of people if I found evidence of portions of them existing by themselves in other people.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So all of that is to say that this bundle of ideas seems to me to be the problem. And it's a general philosophy of, I don't like things different than what I have and what I want. And I don't want to accept that things that are different than what I have and what I want could exist. Does that seem like a fair way to maybe summarize it as a kind of a philosophical statement?
Yeah, it brings me to this statistic that I saw this week, and it was like 65% of Americans have never been abroad.
Yeah.
Like, if you don't know about the world we know with global communication, about the world around you. It's not like it's not like life was 100 years ago when the most you could see was through a National Geographic, the National Geographic Society. I think of George Bailey as a kid touting his membership in the National Geographic Society. But if you don't know the world at large and how people are, the cultures are different, but the people are somewhat the same, that, by and large, most people we love everywhere. Like, we have loved ones, we have family. Those things are important to us. Friendship, fellowship, those are important to us. How you go about it culturally is, very different depending one group of people versus another. But by and large, we have the same goals. We just try to accomplish them in slightly different ways to some degree. And if you're not aware of that, if your view is so myopic, then you think that person whose culture is so vastly different than yours means that their ideals and their the word is escaping me. Their values are equally different because of that, and that's usually not the case.
And then I think along the same lines, and the same place that statistic resided, there was an additional piece that makes it even more interesting. That 64% have not been abroad, but 54% have not visited more than 10 states.
Oh man!
And just thinking about narrowing that further, right? If it's a 10% difference between visiting a portion, a fifth of the country that you reside in versus just one trip outside the country, how many people haven't left the state that they were born in? I'm sure that statistic exists. I don't have it at the hand, but and then take it further, like sub-regions within a state. And you start to think about how, I talked about this difficulty accepting this mindset as, different individual things that have coalesced. This is part of why. Like, if people aren't relatively migrant and exposed to new ideas, it's very easy to see whatever core set of ideas that existed just continue to be reaffirmed in that region over and over and over and over. And so you look at the general divide on red and blue states, for example, or states who immediately sought to implement abortion laws versus those who immediately sought to protect abortion versus those who haven't done anything yet. Like, it's not coincidental that these areas on a map, if you look at it, are generally consistently one specific trend line.
We have a number of different ways set up for you to get in touch with us to provide feedback, ask questions, or just comment in about something we've discussed.
You can hit us up on Twitter or Instagram at untitled_hosts, or shoot an email over to untitled.hosts@gmail.com.
Or get in touch directly with Jesse at jthart.com, or get in touch with me, John, via telepathy.
If you would like to support our work or are interested in listening to our new after show feed, head over to patreon.com/theUntitledPodcast and take a look at the options we have set up.
Thank you for listening.
We hope you've enjoyed the show.
And we hope to connect with more of you as we continue this journey.
That's a wrap.